the ExecMBA podcast. I'm your host, Brett Twitty, and you are listening to a new episode. On this episode of the podcast, I'd like to feature a conversation I recently recorded with Paul Kohnstamm. Paul is an executive MBA format student in our class of 2020, and he also comes from a political background. And he and I recently sat down to talk a little bit more about how he decided to pursue an MBA, what led him to Darden, why he thinks an MBA is particularly helpful for candidates who work in and around the political process, as well as his advice for prospective students generally. So without further ado, here is my conversation with Paul Kohnstamm. Paul, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me, Brett.
So for our listeners at home, tell us a little bit more about you. Who are you and what do you do?
Sure. So I work on Capitol Hill for Senator Tammy Duckworth from Illinois. So I've been with her about the last 8.5 years. She's elected to the Senate in 2016. So I've been her administrative director in the official Senate office for the last 3 years or so, about halfway through our 6-year term. Before that, I spent about 6 years working on her political side. So her 2012 House campaign, her 2014 reelection campaign, and then she ran for the U.S. Senate in 2016. So about 5 of those years out in Chicago working for her, and a couple years here back in D.C. on the political side as well.
So obviously a lot of politics in your background.
Yeah.
How did you get interested in an MBA? Was it something you'd always thought about?
Yeah, I think a couple years after school, I knew that I wanted to go back to graduate school. I was debating early on between law school and business school. And I think as I went along in my career, I saw the applicability of a business degree to what I was working on. By the time I got to the Senate campaign in 2016, I was operations director. I'd managed her House reelection campaign in 2014. And campaigns are very much like startups, right? You open a bank account, you hire employees, especially for a challenger candidate who's not an incumbent. You're starting from scratch. You don't have any infrastructure. You literally start by filing your election paperwork, opening a bank account, hiring some employees. What do you want your employment policies to be? How do you want to set up your structure on the campaign? All those things. And I think it became clear that I wanted to do a business degree. I think in the House every 2 years, there's kind of nonstop for an election cycle. So, and then with the Senate campaign came right after 2 House campaigns for us. So that was sort of a more than full-time gig, and all hands on deck to get her elected to the U.S. Senate. And then with the 6-year term comes the time for some life events, if you will. That gives you some more breathing room to kind of think about what's next for you, and how you want your future to look. You're not gearing up for reelection as soon as you get past the last one. So for me, I started my journey thinking I was going to leave and go to a full-time MBA. I remember having that conversation with you here a couple years ago. You guys were just I think putting the paint on the walls at the time here at Sands Family Ground, opening up right early in the morning to let me in so no one else was here, right before you opened up, I think, for the previous class. But we got talking about the program, and it seemed like a perfect fit. I wasn't really ready to leave my job. We were just getting started in the Senate. This was 2017. We're less than a year in. We're trying to open offices, hire staff. I have a similar role in the official office I did on the campaign in terms of operations, HR, legal, compliance, managing our office budgets, sort of the business side of things, as I like to explain it, especially around here, if people understand that. It was a no-brainer, ability to have a strong DC network, the location being, you can literally see the office from the classroom, which is a little bit too close sometimes, but is nice. And the ability also to get that experience going down to Charlottesville, keep my job while doing this program has been great. So it's a no-brainer for me.
So do you like that startup energy? You had mentioned that, starting a campaign, running a campaign is like a startup. Is that something you enjoy? Yeah,
I do. I like building an organization. So that's one of the things I've liked the most about the last 3 years in the Senate office, where we obviously had a House office that came over to the Senate, a number of employees from the campaign like myself. But we were very much building the plane as we were flying it. And, we had, no offices when we started. We're up to 6 offices now, about 60 people. So that ability to kind of grow the organization and set up the policies in a way that you think will be sustainable in the long run and set up our boss to succeed has been really rewarding. So definitely like that early stage energy, and 3 years in, I can say we're still there. So I've made great progress, but a long way to go. Always.
That's great. So obviously you made the decision to work while pursuing your MBA. Curious about what it was like to come back to school after being away for a little while. You've been working. I think this is probably always on prospective students' minds, right? I'm going to have homework again. I'm going to have exams again. What was it like adjusting back to school and doing it while working?
So for me, I definitely had the academic itch. I was ready to kind of dust off the old school books and get back into it. So I know some colleagues in the program have done previous degrees, and they didn't have sort of that itch necessarily the way I did. But for me, I was excited about it. The ability to kind of learn new things every day and kind of broaden my horizon. So it's definitely an adjustment schedule-wise. I was lucky in that my boss has been super supportive. She herself completed a PhD while being a member of the House of Representatives. So it's very much a fan of school, and professional development is a big thing in our office. So that support has been critical. But ultimately what I found is getting the buy-in of the folks on my team was even more important. When you're disappearing a few Fridays every quarter, as well as some of the week-long residencies and your overseas trip, being transparent about it and saying why you're doing this and that we support other people if they want to go to school has been even more important than getting the buy-in from the folks above me. Both are important, but ultimately they're going to be the ones left with some extra work when you're in class. So I found being upfront and transparent about that. It's not that you're taking a long weekend once a month, but that you're here in school and that that we support them if they want to do the same thing. In fact, we encourage it. So.
Yeah, you're right. We always talked a lot about family and partners, but also coworkers. It's a big part of the story. No one gets through this program on their own, and whether it's at home or at work, other people sort of pick up some of the slack for students here. And so important to have those conversations early. Yeah. And you're right. You are role modeling in a lot of ways. And it's great to have a boss that's supportive too. That's a very important relationship, as anybody does a program like this.
Well, I'd be remiss if I didn't cut in and say that I am, my wife is also in the program, and so we are in it together. So I didn't get the 2-for-1 special I was lobbying for from you, Brett, but I did do my job early on recruiting for Darden. So it's been, to have that support network just here together, it's been a really amazing experience. So.
Well, you preempted my next question, which I was going to ask about, obviously you've done a great job of sort of negotiating this, both being here, but having your own sort of separate identities. And, I think I commend you for that. It's not always easy. It's a relatively small program, about 35 students per class. What have you enjoyed about that? It's got to be great to have a partner sort of sharing in this experience with you.
Yeah, it's absolutely amazing. It's been one of the favorite parts about the program, being able to experience it together. You're right. We did make a conscious sort of decision at the beginning of the program to make sure that we're not, always just hanging out together, eating together at every meal, trying to meet as many different people as we can. And I think that's been great. We even had people introducing us early on. They didn't even realize it. The same last name gave it away, I think, pretty quickly. But, I think if it makes sense for you and your partner, it's a great way to get through the program. Some people think we spend all our time together. We both went to undergrad together, but what people don't realize is I spent 5 years in Illinois working for Senator Duckworth, and Amy was back here in DC. So it's nice to be on the same schedule, 5 years apart. So it's been awesome, and definitely recommend it. We had a couple married couples we were trying to recruit for the next class. I'm not sure we got there, any in the class of 2021. But if you're out there, reach out. We'd love to chat with you about it.
We do have a few couples in the class. It's great. I think you're right. What better way to sort of go through the program and have someone that directly understands what you're experiencing. So we talked a little bit about the adjustment to school. The big challenge for most people is time management, right? So you already had a pretty full life. You talked about sort of high work rate and, building the plane as you were flying it, obviously startup phase at work. That takes a lot of time. You have personal life as well. And now you're trying to layer school in. And so what was the learning curve like? Were there any challenges along the way, things that you had to overcome?
Yeah, I'll go back again to sort of being upfront with your team at work. At least for me, there was no way to really accomplish the program without getting their buy-in, both the people above you and working with you on your team, because they can really make or break your experience if you're in a crunch trying to get something done for school. The ability to have that holistic picture with your team has been hugely important for me. Otherwise, I took a real holistic look as well at the calendar and kind of broke down each quarter. And, in conjunction with Amy and saying, okay, like here's what this quarter looks like. Here's how many weekends we can probably get away realistically. Here are the 2 finals weekends. We try to, as hard as we can, to be home for at least one of them so we can get our finals done when we're not on a plane or in a hotel room. So kind of planning that out well in advance has been important for us. It's certainly possible to do it sort of as you get closer, but for us, we found that's been really helpful.
That's great. So prior to the program, had you done a lot of quantitative work? You mentioned finance and sort of managing budgets and that sort of thing. Was the quantitative work an adjustment? Were some of the softer classes an adjustment to you? I mean, so this is one of the things that I think is on a lot of prospective students' mind. Do I have the right background, right? And what happens when I get into an accounting class? I've never had accounting, or a finance class. I've never had finance. Was that also part of the adjustment?
Absolutely. I've never worked in the private sector. I've use Excel a lot at work in managing budgets. So some of it was familiar, but not the subject matter material, certainly the finance and the accounting. I've dealt with, campaign election accounting, which is slightly different, but similar kind of, you have a set of rules that you have to follow. But that was an adjustment. But also the softer skills, like you mentioned, we were starting up our Senate office at the time. So we're trying to figure out what's our performance review system going to look like? What should our HR policies look like? How can we set up an office with a culture that reflects, the values of the center and the values that we want to have serving the people of Illinois? And all those classes were perfectly timed for me as we were trying to set that up. I remember doing leading organizations one case in the fall of 2018 as we were revamping our performance review system, and the articles and everything was super relevant to what we were working on. So I think you had a learning curve for me with some of the quant classes, but also the softer classes, also very relevant to my day to day. So that was nice to see.
So we went to Capitol Hill last year to do an admissions event. You said something there that really struck me as interesting. So we were talking about this very thing. And if you come without knowing much about accounting, it's all, everything is learning. It's great. You go from zero to wherever, you're going to learn a ton in this program. That really stuck with me. I think it's such an interesting way to look at it because I think students tend to focus more on the deficit, right? I don't know anything about it already. But I thought the way that you looked at it was great because it was, great. None of this is review for you. It's all new.
Yeah, no, I really believe that. I think as I'm looking at electives for the final quarters of the program, I'm trying to have the same approach because, I think one of the big things that I've taken out of this program is sort of the literacy that you gain when folks come in. I know some of my colleagues who've been on the podcast previously have talked about this, who work in politics and government. But when you have business groups or constituent groups come in talking about issues that seem foreign to you, even if you've only touched on them very briefly in a class, you have an ability to have that conversation with those individuals in a way that is on a different level than you would if you have absolutely no background in it. So that I think you get a lot out of those classes when you're starting at zero. Even the ability to then go turn on the Wall Street Journal or CNBC and see an article that you studied in economics related to what you study in economics, and it just makes more sense to you. You're able to converse about it. So I think the reward for those classes where you're starting with no background can often be the best. Yeah.
So that brings us sort of a natural segue. So to All right. For someone in politics, right, there's a lot of different degree paths, potentially, for someone who works around the political process and the political process, policy person, however you want to define that. What's the case for an MBA for someone with that background?
Yeah, I think there are multiple cases. I think my experience is one of them. If you're in the general management or operations side of either a campaign or a congressional office, you're running a small business. And some of them are not so small, especially as you get into parts of government where you're working at perhaps an agency or a large bureaucracy. You could be managing thousands of people in your organization. So I think the case for that is clear. Those are management jobs, and they just happen to be in the nonprofit sector. And all the skills that we learn here in terms of general management are relevant to that. I think on the more quantitative side, it goes back to what I was saying before. I think in the short term, you have an ability to understand where some of the groups are coming in to talk to you about their issues and their business, ability to understand not only the language, but the issues to a greater extent. And then to be able to give your opinion, either of yourself or your agency or of your boss on elected official. So I think there's multiple different ways. And then you also have folks that want to transition. But I think you don't have to be someone that wants to just leave Capitol Hill or campaigns or government to get an MBA. I've certainly found it helpful as I go along in my job day to day.
Yeah, it's a great point that you make. Just because an organization is nonprofit doesn't mean that there's not a lot of relevance for business practices or skills or subject matter that you might acquire in a program like this. There's oftentimes quite a bit of money at stake, quite a number of employees, as you noted. The scale of the federal government is far beyond almost any private sector company, just the amount of money combined with the number of people that are potentially affected by the decisions too. So there's a lot that's there. One of the things that also Freddie Barnes, Steve Gilliland, who were previously on the podcast, talked about is the MBA creates a certain optionality. I think that sort of touches on your third point. Even if you like what you're doing on Capitol Hill, you end up with this credential that opens a lot of doors beyond Capitol Hill, so that longer term, you're sort of thinking about where things might be going, you have options.
Absolutely. I think, both in the related fields in Washington, D.C., one of the fields I'm potentially interested in the longer term is government affairs, public policy, association management. Jim Collins, one of the career reps here in the program, used to work in the association management field. And it's an appealing field to me because you have a mix of the management side and the politics side and the government side all kind of thrown together. So there's a lot of different paths, even if it's not leaving government or politics going in traditional business path, but the world of the intersection of public policy and the MBA, which I think is the title of the Capitol Hill event. So hopefully we can see you all soon there.
Yeah, I will say, so that event, this will be the second year that we've done it. Credit to you and your predecessors in the program for pushing us to do this. I loved being on Capitol Hill. I'm a bit of a history government nerd from way back. I really enjoyed it. I also think Darden has a really, really good message for people that work around the political process and the political process because it's a general management program, right? So this is about giving people a very broad foundation in business. It's a focus on leadership and helping you grow as a leader. And that gives you a really broad platform. You can do a lot of things from there. I thought your point about literacy was also great. The word that I always use with prospective students is related. I always talk about fluency. So the design of this program is not to make you an expert in accounting. It is designed to make you fluent in accounting so that you can have a perspective when talking with an accountant or when an accounting issue is being discussed. But at the same time, you're always going to think about how that fits within the broader operation, enterprise perspective. So I'm excited. Friday, October 18th, we'll be there in the afternoon. I've had the opportunity to spend some time on LinkedIn, trying to find a few alumni to come. To your point, there are a lot of Darden people that work in government relations, government affairs, trade associations, work on the Hill. I mean, it's been fun just looking around, seeing what people are doing. There's definitely a presence. So now you're in your second year. We always tell people it gets a little bit easier as you go along. You're in quarter 7, about to be in quarter 8. How do things feel right now to you? The end is near. You can see the finish line. How's it going?
It's going well. The middle year is a long path. So you have sort of the 12-month stretch from Q3 through Q8, which so I'm happy to be close on the second half of that, over the hump. But we've loved every quarter. And, I think we're excited about electives coming up. You have more flexibility to choose courses you want to take, and one in quarter 7, and then 2 for us in 9 and the full electives in 9 and 10. So that's an exciting time too. I'm signed up to go to Japan, a Darden Worldwide course, and quarter 10. I did the Europe Global Residency. So I think that will be a nice complement to the Europe trip, which is also a really nice way to break up the long year and sort of the routine quarter to quarter. But, I think one of the benefits of the program is that the core is stretched out. So we're in quarter 7, we're doing marketing. Quarter 8, we have another marketing and strategy. So we're still doing those core classes and learning new material. So it's nice that you can kind of have that breadth of experience in different subjects. When we started the program, it seemed like marketing was so far away, but now we're here. So I've enjoyed every minute of it.
I try to tell our first year students, you're here to be on a panel, volunteering your time on a Saturday afternoon to talk with our first year students, our newest students, the class of 2021. Answer their questions, give some tips and insights. I try to remind folks on these weekends, at least this time of year, they're in their second weekend residency of the first quarter. This is probably the hardest part of the program in some ways. So getting started, you're taking a couple pretty challenging courses, global economics, decision analysis. These courses tend to stretch people. What advice do you give people as, you're about to talk to some first year students? What advice would you give them about how to navigate, the first couple months, first few months in the program?
Yeah, those first few quarters are definitely tough because you're not in your routine yet. I think for me, going back to what I said earlier, I've now gotten to the point where I can take a look at the arc of a quarter, right? I know, I got a work trip here in the middle of the quarter, I have some personal weekends mixed in. What weddings you go into, everything that sort of fills your life, family commitments, work commitments, all the above. So in quarter 1 and quarter 2, you don't really know what that arc is going to look like yet. And I think that's challenging and scary, right? When you're going into your first exams, you're like, how does this work? And now you're kind of into the routine. So I think the advice I would give is figure out what works for you. Are you the person that's going to stay home that Friday night when exams open the first weekend and you crank through it maybe that first weekend so you can get a week break in between each quarter? Are you the person that needs a minute to digest what you just got through the previous 2 weekend residencies and you're maybe taking them the Saturday and Sunday after you've had some time to prepare and kind of get your head around what you need to do, and you just know that that's the way it is, and then you start up next quarter? I've been in the latter, but I think some of the classmates that were on the panel a year ago with us, that's really works for them, having that break. So you have to figure out what is going to be sustainable in your life. How's it going to fit in your picture with family and with work? But once you do it a couple times, while you also get the routine and you also kind of know how much time it's going to take to get through the quarter. So it becomes easier, as well as, experience with getting past the initial subject matter that can be challenging as well.
Yeah. The thing that I'm struck by as well as you talk with first year students is they haven't quite figured out how class works. The case method, it takes a little while to figure out, what does participation look like? And, when do you talk? And, how does that whole dynamic work? That's something that I could feel, it's just a touch of anxiety in the air during the first homeroom. They're waiting to be maybe cold called, which obviously, for those of you who are not familiar with that, sort of when the professor just calls on you, you didn't volunteer. That is something that happens here at Darden. It takes a little while. Did it take you a while to get adjusted to the case method and the class experience?
Absolutely. I think we had Professor Venkat, who's a dean of faculty at Darden, early on in the program in quarter one for a course. And I think he made a point that stuck with me, which is you eventually figure out to separate the signal from the noise, and not just a decision analysis reference, but also the volume of material you're trying to get through. You learn the right systems and processes for yourself. How can you get through a case? And you have the key takeaways, even though if you can't run every number yourself, it's not realistic basically for any one person to do every single calculation for every single case coming up on a weekend residency. I don't think I'm breaking any news there to anyone on the faculty, but you learn the ability to get the key points out. And then once you realize that if you have enough of that background going into a class that you're not going to get cold call and have nothing to say, then that takes some of the pressure off because you're not necessarily going to be the one to run through the exact calculations in every case in a weekend. But you'll have the ability to, if you put in the time and have the baseline knowledge on at least every case, and then maybe a deeper knowledge working with your learning team on a specific case, in the end, it all kind of shakes out. And you'll learn quickly sort of the people that are able to, kind of be on their feet, and it becomes less scary as you get through it a few times. So for certain.
You made a really good point, and I want to talk a touch about this because we talk with prospective students about how you figure out in the program the amount of work you need to do to be prepared for class, which when you first start is probably some of the stuff that you're doing is maybe not necessarily too much, but it might be overkill at a certain point. You're sort of trying to figure out that filter. And then also you kind of figure out at some point that you can't do it all, right? And I don't mean to make our students sound unambitious, I think it's just the hard reality of that's a leadership skill. Right.
Absolutely.
You have to figure
80% solution sometimes.
Right. You have to figure out what's important. What's the most important thing? What's the priority right now? And triage sometimes and ask other people for help or lean on your learning team or whatever the case may be. Sometimes when I share that advice, I feel like people who are processing it, the people that are attracted to this program are driven, motivated people. I mean, everything that you talked about in your background, you're somebody who's worked very hard, achieved a lot. You're now you were thinking about going back to school. It's a certain kind of person follows that path. I think sometimes prospective students hear that in a certain way, and I'm like, really? But I think that, to me, that's true to the program. Was that a surprise to you when you got into the program that you kind of got to this point where you were thinking about I can't be perfect all the time and do all these things just so?
Yes, it was. I think the other thing that is closely related to that is that for those coming from an undergrad or maybe a different graduate program where it's not the case method, you're used to a professor going in front of the room the first class and kind of saying, okay, here's the formula, here's a couple steps, here's an example, and then the next class is maybe applying it. So everything's backwards a little bit at Darden in a good way. I found that it's been much more effective from a learning process for me, but you might get some videos or a technical note ahead of time, but you're very much sort of thrown in the deep end and have to swim out. And I found that's been effective for me. But where you can get tripped up with that is if you think that you're going to solve everything without having that first class about it, because the class comes after, right? So if you're given a decision analysis problem and, you spend some time looking at the technical note, maybe some videos, I think one of the good pieces of advice that I got is, spend an hour and a half, 2 hours max sort of on one case. You got, a dozen or so for a weekend. And then, you'll go over it in class. You'll have sort of your first attempt, but don't kill yourself on one case. And I think exactly like you said, that's a leadership skill. It's triage. It's also knowing when to cut your losses. Exactly. It's a good skill, to have too. Because ultimately, you have to be efficient with your time. And it does take a bit of changing the way you orient yourself in an academic setting to get to there, because you are used to getting the material first and then wanting to solve it before you get to class. And it is a little bit different process here in a good way, I think.
Yeah, it is. I think for, that there's so many learning curves. We talked about a number of them. But, if you're used to coming in and that sort of transmissive approach and it's all going to be very clear by the end of the class period, it's just not how it works. And, oftentimes many people coming out of learning team or their group, whatever way they've prepared for class, they may not even necessarily, we got like a few different ideas here. We think this might be the thing. And then you go to class, and class can sometimes make things a little bit murkier because, again, it's not about an answer. It's about an approach, the questions that you're asking, things that you're thinking about. And even if the professor tells you, well, this is what happened, doesn't mean that that's actually the answer either.
The good news is I think that, in my experience, mimics life more closely than the other way around, right? In the workplace, you're not getting that pre-lecture, the background first, and then an opportunity to solve the problem. You might get some, background as you go along, but ultimately a lot of what you're doing on a day-to-day basis is kind of figuring out as you go along, and you make yourself that expert based on working with your colleagues and learning from failures and all that. So I think the Darden classroom does an excellent job sort of mimicking the real sort of reality of being in a business situation.
Yeah, that's definitely the goal. And the other thing I think that Darden students get comfortable with, and I'm curious your thoughts on this, and I've had some recent conversations with some of the residential students about this on the Experience Darden podcast, is, the faculty don't let you off the hook in the sense that you gotta, like, the question is always, what's the decision here? This is what we're trying to do, or it's often the main question is like, what are we trying, what's the issue? What should be done? And
why does it matter? Too?
Yeah,
and I think they do an excellent job tying it back to why this calculation matters for the actual business or organizational priority.
Yeah, and I'm curious about how that has helped you as somebody having a perspective or making decisions. You practice a lot of that in class, is at least my impression.
Yeah, absolutely. I think they do an excellent job with sort of setting one of the benefits of the case method is that it's very scenario based, right? And you have background that you're given. You kind of step into the role of that protagonist in the case, and at the end of the case, you kind of feel the blood pressure going up, and you're living that decision, and it makes it such a rewarding way to learn because, that's how it is in the real world. And you're given some facts, you're debating around the room with your colleagues and your team. Sometimes you need to sell your boss on something. Sometimes you need to sell the professor on something or your learning teammates. And I think the case method and the way that the Darden classroom is run really reflects that sort of reality day to day.
So, Paul, we talked a little bit about electives. What was your approach in terms of thinking about the classes that you wanted to take? What are you taking? You mentioned Japan, that you're going to be going to Japan. Any other electives that you're excited about? Yeah.
So, like you alluded to earlier, I'm signed up for some classes that I would not have the opportunity to have experience with the subject matter before. So entrepreneurial finance, institutions and global markets, which is Yorgos class, which was always hotly contested. Especially if he does a class during leadership residency one, the first week in Charlottesville, is a sort of real electric presence in the classroom. So I bid a lot of points on that. Japan, you mentioned ultimate questions with Professor Wicks. I really enjoyed the ethics class. It's a lot of applicability in the political campaign government world. So I'm signed up for that. And I took entrepreneurial thinking as well with Professor Fairchild. And it was great to connect sort of the face with some of our Capitol Hill events that he's been at with us. And I take that class. And you mentioned, campaigns especially are very much like startups. I think different than government. It's worth pointing out. You have, the development side, the fundraising side. You have cash flow. You got to decide, who are the voters we should go after. So you have sort of a market research side of it. You have digital acquisition. So how much should you spend to acquire a name? So you have a marketing aspect of it. You got looking at different TV markets, TV advertising, persuasion with voters, voter contacts, all kinds of really applicable things to a business context, just sometimes with different terminology. But it was great to be in that entrepreneurial class with Professor Fairchild because he touched on a lot of those issues as well.
And y'all have had some VIP guests throughout the quarter.
Yeah, he had a number of, I think we had about 5 guest speakers, and they were all excellent. So that was great.
Yeah. So a full slate, a lot of diversity there. We get a lot of questions about specialization in the elective space, and there's certainly value to that. But I think just from a philosophical standpoint, this program we're much more about breadth. Our goal is to make you a generalist, because for managers, for leaders, you're really not going to be the technician in the room. That was something that one of our alumni said to me on an earlier podcast episode, and it stuck with me. I'm like, yeah, of course, right? You're moving on and upwards, and you're going to be managing teams. No one's going to ask you to be that specialist. And I think even in the elective space, the program is aligned around that. So in a day of advice giving, which you're about to do here, any other sort of last tips, anything that you would encourage people to think about as either they're weighing the decision to go to business school or Darden, or even just navigating the application process? Any last suggestions?
Yeah, I think if you're someone out there who, like me, was debating sort of between full-time and this program, I think have a realistic conversation with yourself about the pros and cons of each. I certainly feel like I made the right decision, but they're very different experiences. And I felt like, and I know Amy felt like the same way, we were at the point of our lives where this program made the most sense. We didn't want to stop working for 2 years, but we wanted the same sort of quality of program and the professors and the Darden experience. And I think, for someone that went in thinking about doing full-time, take a pause and weigh the pros and cons of those 2 decisions, because I think they are very different and both fantastic in their own way. But I think this program has a lot to offer, and folks should consider it if it makes sense for them.
That's a great point. I mean, we always highlight that if you think about the populations of people, one looking at the residential program, another looking at the executive MBA program, sort of the sketch, the residential class around 2 to 10 years of work experience, our executive MBA class from 5 to 25, 30 plus years.
There's a lot of overlap.
There's a lot of overlap there. And if you happen to find yourself in the middle of that Venn diagram, you could go either way. And so there's a lot of good questions to ask around, do you like what you're doing? Do you feel like you have some momentum? You feel like you would be giving up some of that momentum, take 2 years off? Maybe you want to make a significant switch, an internship would be necessary. There's a lot of different things to think about. That's great advice. Although it's worth noting, at the end of the day, everybody, all formats, exact same degree, which is also a little bit of a misconception out there. Everybody graduates with the Darden MBA. It says the exact same thing. One graduation ceremony, which you will get to do in just a few months.
Yeah, we just reserved hotel rooms for our 2 families, so we'll have a full crowd down in Charlottesville in May 2020. So we're looking forward to it.
Well, I think that day, and I will say this as somebody who's just been sort of on the periphery of it, that day is as exciting for the families as it is for the graduates, because, again, it takes a lot of people to get someone through this program. So,
absolutely.
So, Paul, thank you so much for taking time out of your Saturday afternoon. It's a pleasure. Thanks for all your insights, and look forward to seeing you on the Hill in a couple weeks.
Thanks for having me, Brett.
And that was my conversation with Paul Kohnstamm, an executive MBA format student in our class of 2020. As always, if you have any comments, suggestions, requests, anything you'd like for us to cover here on the podcast, we're all ears. We can be reached at exec, that's EXEC, MBA at darden.virginia.edu. And until next time, thanks for listening.